What is up, guys? We are back for my preview and final predictions for this weekend's UFC card, UFC 296, headlined by Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. I said it right. I said 296, so y'all can stop correcting me in the comments of my last video. And this is the final card of the year, the last fights of 2023, and we're going to have to wait a whole month until the next card. But what a way to end the year. 2 title fights. Leon Edwards is defending his welterweight title against Colby Covington, and Alexandre Pantoja, the new flyweight champion, is looking to defend his belt against Brandon Royval. And then the undercard as well is really good. The rest of the main card is insane. Shavkat versus Thompson is a great fight. Tony Ferguson versus Paddy Pimblett is a great fight. Vicente Luque versus Garry is a good fight. The prelims are also very good, headlined by Emmett versus Bryce Mitchell. That's a really good fight. Cody Garbrandt is also on the prelims, and then the early prelims as well are very good. Dustin Jacoby versus Alonzo Menafield is a great fight. If you haven't ever done so, go back and watch some of Dustin Jacoby's glory fights. I'm not even a big kickboxing fan, but a lot of his fights against like Simon Marcus are really fun to go back and watch. There's also some really interesting prospects like the undefeated Shamil Gassiev making his UFC debut. But overall, from bottom to top, this card is very good. One of the best of the year. And let's start with Cody Garbrandt versus Brian Kelleher. This fight will show where Cody's skills are currently at, because if he cannot beat Brian Kelleher, then he will never be at the top again. Brian Kelleher has pretty much cemented himself right in the middle of the bantamweight division. He is better than half the fighters and worse than half the fighters. Like, he can beat guys like Kevin Kroom, but he can't beat guys like Umar. Stylistically, on paper, Cody should win this fight. He is a better striker, a better wrestler. He is more active. Brian Kelleher is extremely inactive. He takes a lot of time off in between fights. He hasn't fought in over a year. On the feet, Cody is a much more technical boxer. He can use his footwork, get in and out of range very quickly. He has a massive speed advantage as well. He's faster with his footwork. He's faster with his punches. He reacts faster. And Kelleher doesn't have very good striking defense. He gets tagged a lot, especially against higher level strikers. Kelleher does have a decent amount of power, but he's going to have a really hard time hitting Cody, especially as Cody moves in and out of range, moves around, switches off at angles. And then if Cody wants to, which I think he should, he can also mix up the wrestling. We saw in the Trevin Jones fight that Cody used more wrestling than he used to. And the wrestling could be a very good weapon for Cody, as Brian Kelleher does not have very good takedown defense. We've seen that in his past few fights. The only thing Cody really has to watch out for is that guillotine, because Brian Kelleher has a very good guillotine. He has submitted so many people with it. He is constantly looking for it from mount, off his back, off the takedowns. But once Cody gets past that guillotine, he's going to have the advantage on top. He can land ground and pound, control him. He can look to transition. I know Cody's not the best grappler. He doesn't have any submission wins, but Kelleher's grappling defense is not very good. Now, Kelleher can get up from the bottom. He's good at scrambling up. And on the flip side, if Kelleher shoots a takedown in on Cody, Cody should be able to defend it. Kelleher is not the best offensive wrestler, and Cody has pretty good takedown defense. The first line of takedown defense starts with your footwork, and Cody has amazing footwork. So in the end, I'm definitely going to go with Cody, and I'll go with him by a decision win. I think he's going to pick Kelleher apart on the feet behind his speed advantage, behind his overall technical boxing advantage. I think Kelleher is going to have a hard time hitting Cody, and then when Cody mixes in the takedowns, once he gets past that guillotine, that's the only thing I'm worried about. He definitely has the advantage on top. I do think Kelleher has the chin to take Cody's shots. Kelleher has a very good chin. He's only been knocked out once. So I think Cody's going to have a hard time knocking him out. But overall, Cody is just better everywhere, in my opinion. And I think he'll win a decision. And then we go to our featured prelim. Emmett takes on Bryce Mitchell. Mitchell steps in for Giga Chikadze on short notice. And it's interesting to see how that will play and affect in this fight, because Emmett was originally supposed to face Giga Chikadze, who was a striker, but now he's facing Bryce Mitchell, who's going to look to take him down. But on the flip side, Mitchell is taking this fight on short notice with no training camp. no time to prepare, whereas Josh Emmett has had a full training camp, albeit for another guy. Can Bryce Mitchell take this fight to the ground? That is the big question going into it, because if he can't, I don't like his chances. On the feet, Bryce isn't the best striker. He has some decent kicks, good front kicks, some decent roundhouse kicks. He can switch stances too, but with his hands, he's not very good. He's not super powerful. His boxing defense is not very good. He gets tagged a lot, like we saw in the Danny Ige fight, like we saw in the Ilia Topuria fight. And you do not want to get tagged against a guy who hits as hard as Josh Emmett. Mitchell needs to keep this fight out of boxing range because Emmett does his best work in boxing range. He wants to be in boxing range. He doesn't really have kicks of his own, and we saw how Yair was able to effectively use kicks against him in their fight. And when Bryce Mitchell is in southpaw, he needs to look for that body kick constantly. I know he doesn't really use it too much, but we saw how effective that was against Emmett in the Yair fight, where Yair was really hurting him with the body kicks, but the second it got into boxing range, Emmett was landing on Yair, and we saw the power difference between the two. Every time Emmett landed on Yair, he hurt him. But when Bryce Mitchell is in southpaw, that does open up that right hand for Josh Emmett. Emmett can step to the outside. He has to control the outside foot position and then line up that right straight. He can throw the right cross down the center or the right hook around Bryce Mitchell's guard, because when they are in opposite stances, that right side does open up. Emmett can also look for the check left hook as Bryce Mitchell moves into range. We saw in Mitchell's last fight, Dan Ige use that left hook very effectively, and Mitchell was also constantly circling into that power right hand of Ige, and if he does that against Emmett, he could get knocked out. Mitchell just gets tagged way too much on the feet, but if he can take this fight to the ground, he definitely has the advantage there with his jiu-jitsu, with his grappling. Even though I think Mitchell's jiu-jitsu is a tad bit overrated, he definitely has the advantage there in this fight. It's just, can he use it? Does he have the wrestling to take this fight to the ground? Because in past fights, his wrestling has not looked too good, and Josh Emmett has pretty good takedown defense. He's also just strong, which makes him harder to take down, and Bryce Mitchell's in on short notice. You know what? I'm going to go with the underdog here. I'm going to go with Josh Emmett, and I'll take him by a decision. I think he will be able to defend most of the takedowns. As I said, he has pretty good takedown defense. Now, if he does get taken down, then he's in a bit of trouble. I'm not sure Bryce Mitchell's going to submit him, but he can absolutely hold him down and look to transition between different positions. But I see him having a hard time repeatedly taking down Josh Emmett. I think he might get him down once or twice. And then on the feet, I think Mitchell just gets pieced up. He has the kicks he can use. He can use the body kicks, can use the teeps and the front kicks. But I think Emmett's going to be able to work his way into range, counter the leg kicks, look to counter Bryce Mitchell with that right hand. Mitchell doesn't have very good boxing of his own and doesn't have the power to threaten Emmett on the feet. So in the pocket, I think Emmett's going to piece him up. He hits way harder than Bryce Mitchell, and Mitchell does get hit way too much. So I could see Emmett possibly knocking him out as well, and he's on short notice, so who knows if he'll have a good weight cut. And he's definitely going to come in underprepared, whereas Josh Emmett has had a full training camp. So I am going to go with Josh Emmett by a decision. And then we go to Vicente Luque versus Ian Garry. Everybody hates Ian Garry now because of the whole situation with his wife and the whole Neil Magny thing. I didn't like that either. And then under one of Vicente Luque's Instagram posts, he basically mocked his religion, made fun of his religion, claimed he was Jesus. So I don't know if these guys are still friends or if they ever were friends. I know they trained together, and I'm pretty sure they said they were friends at one point. In Luque's last fight against RDA, we saw him use a lot more wrestling than he normally does. That's typically not a strategy he uses, but I think it's also something he should try and do in this fight. He should look to take Ian Garry down because on the feet, Garry just has the advantage. But if Vicente can take Ian Garry down, then he can look to use his jiu-jitsu. Vicente has very good, very underrated grappling. He has good submissions. He's constantly looking for Darce chokes on the ground. That's his best submission. But he can also submit you with rear naked chokes, anaconda chokes. He has a very diverse arsenal of submissions on the ground, but can he get this fight to the ground? That's the big question. He isn't the best wrestler, and in his last fight against RDA, a lot of those takedowns came because he was just so much bigger and stronger than RDA. it wasn't really because he's some elite wrestler, whereas him and Ian Garry are fairly similar in size. Ian Garry also has seemingly decent takedown defense. We haven't really seen him go up against a really good wrestler yet, but he's fast on the feet. He has good footwork that he can use to avoid the takedowns. And even if Luque does take him to the ground, he has been training with Gilbert Burns, who's definitely been teaching Ian how to get out of different positions, how to defend submissions. So even if Luque can take this fight to the ground, I think he's going to have a hard time submitting Ian Garry. And then on the feet, although there are some openings Luque could exploit with his boxing, Ian definitely has the advantage overall. Ian has a very good jab, a very good right hand. That's his best punch. He also has very good kicks. Those outside leg kicks are going to be a huge weapon in this fight. We saw how effectively Ian Garry was able to use those kicks against Neil Magny in his last fight, and because they are both orthodox fighters, those outside leg kicks are always there. He can also mix up lead leg kicks to the head and the body and front kicks to the head as well. Ian has very diverse kicks, but where he leaves holes is with his boxing defense. He keeps his chin up at times, which leaves him exposed for hooks. We actually saw Song Kenan drop him with a left hook, and one of Luque's best punches is the left hook, and Luque also has a lot of power in his hands. So if Luque can land clean on Ian Garry, he could drop him. Ian fights like a sniper. He's going to look to use the jab, use the leg kicks, keep Luque out of boxing range. Luque needs to find a way around that jab, around those kicks, and try and counter Garry with that left hook. They are in the same stance, so that left side is open on both guys. But Garry doesn't have too good of a left hook, and Luque has a very good left hook. But Luque does not have very good striking defense. He does not move his head at all, and we saw in the Jeff Neal fight, those straight shots down the center line are always open. The speed of Ian Garry, he's definitely going to have the speed advantage in this fight, is also going to give Luque a ton of problems. So in the end, I'm definitely going to go with Ian Garry, and I'll go with him by a third round TKO. I was originally going to take him by a decision, but after rewatching the Jeff Neal fight, Vicente's chin is just nowhere near where it used to be. Luque used to have a really good chin, but after the Wonder Boy fight and the Jeff Neal fight, his chin just isn't the same. I think Ian will defend all the takedowns if Luque attempts them, and then on the feet, I think he'll just pick him apart. The jab, the 1-2s are always going to be there down the center line since Luque doesn't move his head. The outside leg kicks are also going to be a really good weapon. I think he'll be able to use the threat of that right hand to keep Luque out of range, keep him at bay where he wants him. And I also just think Luque has declined so much. He's nowhere near the fighter he used to be. He does still have a lot of power in his hands. He can make anything happen on the feet. And Ian Garry doesn't have the best striking defense, but in the end, I just think he's too much. I think he's going to drop him with a right hand down the center, and I think he's going to finish him with ground and pound in the third round. And then we go to Tony Ferguson versus Paddy Pimblett. We all know Tony has greatly declined from the fighter he once was. He's on a 6-fight losing streak, got knocked out by Justin Gaethje, lost to Charles, lost to Beneil, got knocked out cold by Michael Chandler, got submitted by Nate Diaz and Bobby Green. Whereas Paddy is on a 6-fight winning streak. He's undefeated in the UFC, at least on paper. But this is a very interesting fight, one that's actually winnable for Tony. Can Tony's chin hold up on the feet? That's one of the big questions going into this fight, because Tony's chin has not looked nearly as good as it has in past fights. But on the feet, this fight can actually be pretty competitive. Paddy is an all offense, no defense kind of fighter. He is extremely aggressive with his striking. He runs at you, throws punches, continuously walks forward. He's not the most technical, but he hits very hard. But he does leave a lot of holes, a lot of openings for counter shots. He leaves his chin straight up in the air. He keeps his hands very low. He doesn't move his head at all. And those wild winging punches open up for counter shots. And Tony Ferguson still hits really hard. We all know that a a fighter's power is the last thing that goes, and Tony still hits very hard. He dropped Bobby Green in his last fight. He dropped Michael Chandler, who has an iron chin. And Paddy is extremely hittable. We saw Jared Gordon constantly tag Paddy, and Jared Gordon does not hit very hard. If Jared Gordon had Tony Ferguson's power, I'm not sure Paddy would have made it out of that fight without getting knocked out cold. But at the same time, Tony also doesn't have very good striking defense. He throws out wild punches at weird angles that leave openings for him to get countered by Paddy. Now, Paddy is the least technical striker Tony has fought in a long time, so I'm not sure Paddy's going to be able to pick out those counters. But if he can, Paddy hits very hard, and we don't know where Tony's chin is. Can Tony take Paddy's shots? That is the biggest question, because if he can, Tony could knock Paddy out. Now, Paddy does have a very good chin, but he's also never faced anyone that hits nearly as hard as Tony. Tony is by far the hardest hitter Paddy has ever fought. It's not even close. And Paddy sometimes likes to brawl, so if Paddy gets into a brawl with Tony and Tony's chin can hold up, Tony can absolutely knock Paddy out. Now, Paddy does do his best work on the ground with his jiu-jitsu, but he doesn't have the best ways of getting the fight to the ground. He's not the best wrestler. He has a decent double leg, but he doesn't set it up very well. He could try and pull guard, I guess. But can Tony defend the takedowns? Does he still have the takedown defense to do so? Because back in the day, his takedown defense was pretty good. But at this point, his takedown defense has looked much worse. His grappling defense has looked much worse. He got submitted by Bobby Green. He got submitted by Nate Diaz. In pretty much all of his fights, he gets caught in a submission. That armbar against Charles, that heel hook against Benil, and they got submitted against Nate Diaz and Bobby Green, obviously. So if Paddy does get Tony down, then I think Paddy will probably submit him, and he'll definitely dominate. Tony does have decent grappling. He can attempt submissions of his own. He'll work off his back, but at this point, Paddy is just better on the ground. But can Paddy get this fight to the ground? That is another big question, because if Tony can defend the takedowns, Paddy is in trouble. But in the end, what is my final prediction? Paddy is almost a 4-1 favorite, which is insane to me. You know what? I'm going to take a massive risk here. I'm going to go with Tony Ferguson, and I'm going to go with him by a 3rd round knockout. I think he defends all of the takedowns. Paddy Pimblett couldn't even get Jared Gordon down, who doesn't have the best takedown defense. Now, if Paddy does get this fight down once by whatever means, whether that's shooting in a double leg, pulling guard, Imanari rolling, knocking Tony down, I think if this fight touches the ground once, Paddy will probably submit him. But I'm going to trust Tony's takedown defense, and then on the feet, I think Tony picks him apart. Paddy is very aggressive and tenacious with his striking. He hits very hard, but he's not the most technical, and I trust Tony's chin to hold up. Tony has only been knocked down once during his losing streak, and that was against Michael Chandler, the hardest hitting guy at lightweight. So I trust Tony's chin to hold up, and then I think he'll pick Paddy apart. I think Paddy leaves way too many holes. I think Tony hits way too hard. We saw him drop Bobby Green in his last fight. We saw him hurt Michael Chandler, who has a really good chin. Tony's really fast. He can pick out his counter shots decently, and Paddy leaves his chin straight up in the air, is way too hittable. So I'm going to take a bit of a risk here, and I'm going to go with Tony Ferguson, and I'm going to take him by a 3rd round knockout. And then we go to one of the fights I'm most looking forward to between two of my favorite fighters, Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. I think this fight is actually a lot more interesting and competitive than most people think. On the feet, it's fairly even now. Wonderboy absolutely has the advantage. I'm not sure anyone besides maybe Leon Edwards could beat Stephen Thompson in a pure striking match. But Shavkat does have some good offensive techniques he could use. He has a lot of power in his hands, a really good jab, one of the best jabs in the whole division. The way he was able to out jab Jeff Neal despite being in opposite stances was crazy. And Jeff Neal is one of the best boxers in the UFC and arguably the best boxer in the welterweight division, and Shavkat was able to outbox him at times. As I said, Shavkat has a very good jab. That's probably his best punch. He also has a very good right hand, has a lot of power in his right hand, and he has some decent kicks. He's very diverse with his striking on the feet. Wonderboy, on the other hand, I mean, what is there there to say about his striking. It is top notch. It does not get any better. Despite his age, he is a better striker than he has ever been. His striking has not declined one bit. He can switch stances very effectively. He is just as good in orthodox as he is in southpaw, which is going to be a massive advantage in this fight. He has very good kicks backed behind his karate background. He's an undefeated kickboxer. Those side kicks are going to be a big weapon. The leg kicks in orthodox are going to be a huge weapon. He can also mix up the body kicks and the head kicks, although he has to be very cautious when he throws body kicks and head kicks because Shavkat could catch them and take him down that way. Although that's not something Shavkat typically does, it's something he could do in this fight. And then Wonderboy obviously has very good hands, a very good jab out of both stances. I said Shavkat's best punch is his jab, but he's not going to out-jab Wonderboy. He's not going to outstrike Wonderboy either. Shavkat doesn't have very good striking defense. He moves back and forth on a straight line, doesn't really cut off at angles. He doesn't move his head at all. That's his biggest weakness. He does keep his hands up and his chin low, which is good, but because he doesn't move his head, those straight shots from Wonderboy are going to continuously land. His offense is his defense at times. He likes to use his length, use his reach, use his power to keep his opponents at bay. Whereas on the other hand, Wonderboy has very good striking defense, very hard to hit. He's so smooth and slick with his footwork. He can get caught at times, and Shavkat does hit very hard, which is a little worrying on the feet, and that's why it could be fairly competitive, but where it is not competitive at all is if Shavkat takes this fight to the ground. Shavkat might have the best submissions in the welterweight division. He can submit you on the feet. He can submit you on the ground. He has so many different submissions he can go to. He's a very good wrestler. That double leg of his is elite, and at this point in his career, Stephen Thompson does not have the best takedown defense. He does have very good movement and footwork, which he can use to avoid the takedowns, but besides that, everything else isn't there. So I'm definitely going to go with Shavkat, and I'm going to go with him by a first round submission. The only way I see Wonderboy winning this fight is if Shavkat decides to test himself in the striking, decides not to shoot takedowns, or he just entertains the striking for way too long and Wonderboy catches him and knocks him out. Now, Shavkat does have an amazing chin, so it would be hard for Wonderboy to knock him out. But I think Shavkat's smarter than that. I think he will shoot in takedowns as soon as he can, and Wonderboy does not have very good takedown defense at this point. Gilbert Burns and Bilal Muhammad were able to easily take down Wonderboy, and they are a lot smaller and worse wrestlers than Shavkat. And I think the second this fight touches the ground, Shavkat will find some sort of submission, but it wouldn't surprise me if Wonderboy did knock him out. And then we go to the co-main event, the most underrated fight on the whole card. Alexandre Pantoja defends his flyweight belt for the first time against Brandon Royval. It seems like nobody's talking about this fight when, in my opinion, this might be the best fight on the whole card. This is a rematch between these two. They did fight not too long ago, and Pantoja submitted him in the second round, but it was a fairly competitive fight up until the submission. Pantoja is quickly becoming one of my favorite fighters. He's so entertaining to watch, and he has such an interesting story, but this is a really interesting fight. On the feet, it is extremely competitive. We saw that in their first fight. Both of these guys kind of like to brawl on the feet, especially Pantoja. Pantoja really likes to brawl, has a lot of power in his hands. He doesn't really use too many kicks. He looks to box with his opponents in the pocket and just trade shots, whereas Royval will mix it up a little more. He's probably overall a little bit more technical of a striker and definitely a more diverse striker. And then on the ground, these guys are also fairly even as well. We saw that in their first fight. Pantoja did look to be the better offensive grappler and definitely the better wrestler, but Royval was constantly scrambling, constantly rolling, looking to get up, attacking different submissions. I would say Pantoja has the overall jiu-jitsu advantage on the ground. He's also got the wrestling advantage. Royval doesn't really have good takedown defense. We've seen that in his past fights, and Pantoja is a decent offensive wrestler, has a good double leg. And then on the ground, Pantoja is constantly looking to transition, constantly attacking any submission. He has a very good rear naked choke. He has very quick back takes. We saw that in their first fight. And Royval's very similar. He also has very good grappling of his own. He's also constantly looking for submissions, whether he's on the bottom, whether he's on top. the scrambles between these two are going to be insane. We saw those scrambles in their first fight, but since their first fight, Royval has only gotten better. So has Pantoja though, but Royval went on a 3-fight win streak where in his last 2 fights, he finished Matt Schnell and Mateu Nicolau in the first round. But since their first fight, Pantoja has also got a lot better. So this is going to be a really interesting fight, but in the end, I'm definitely going to have to go with Alexandre Pantoja, and I will take him by a 3rd round TKO. On the feet, I just think Pantoja is overall better. Royval does hit pretty hard, but Pantoja has an amazing chin. He took clean shots from Brandon Moreno and Davison Figueiredo, one of the hardest hitters pound for pound ever. I think he has the chin to take Royval's punches and then return with power shots of his own. Pantoja hits really hard, and then on the ground, Pantoja does have the wrestling to take Royval down and probably has a grappling advantage, but it's close. And then I think Pantoja would be able to defend any takedown Royval attempted. So in the end, I am going to go with Alexandre Pantoja to win this fight by a TKO. Then we go to our main event of the evening. Leon Edwards takes on Colby Covington, looking to defend his belt for the 2nd time. This fight finally happened. It was rumored like 4 times. It was first rumored at UFC 291 in London, then 294 in Abu Dhabi, then 295 in New York, and we finally got it. And this is an extremely interesting fight. On the feet, Leon does have the overall advantage. He's definitely the better striker overall. He fights like a sniper. He has very good kicks, a good jab, a good left hand. If he wants to, he can switch into orthodox to give him a different angle he can attack on. He's very quick on the feet. He has a decent amount of power. Now, I think a lot of people do overrate his power because of the Kamaru Usman knockout. Leon's power comes more from how he's able to pinpoint exactly where he needs to hit his opponents rather than natural power. But that actually allows him to keep his power way later into the fight because he doesn't rely on explosiveness. He relies more on technique and accuracy. Leon is going to look to keep this fight at range on the feet, whereas Colby on the feet is going to look to get into boxing range, get in the pocket, constantly shoot takedowns, use the strikes to open up the takedowns. Colby isn't exceptionally good anywhere on the feet. He has some decent boxing, but he is kind of wild with his punches, not the most technical. He has some decent kicks, good body kicks, good head kicks that he can mix up. On the feet, he's going to look to pressure Leon, put a pace on him, overwhelm the data, not allow Leon to pick out counters, pick up on tells, and then use his pressure, use his boxing to get this fight to the ground. He has some of the best, if not the best, wrestling in the welterweight division. I see a lot of people overrating Leon Edwards' takedown defense because he was able to defend a decent amount of Usman's takedowns in their 3rd fight, but Colby and Usman are way different wrestlers. For one, Colby is much younger, he's healthier, he doesn't have the bad knees. Usman's knees are terrible, he doesn't have the same drive on his takedowns that he used to, and Colby's just overall style of wrestling will give Leon more problems than Usman. Usman is much more of a singular shot fighter. He'll shoot in a takedown from range, and if he doesn't get it, he gives up on it, whereas Colby will actually chain wrestle. Colby will shoot in, and if Leon is able to defend the initial shot, he'll transition to a different takedown, which is something Kamaru Usman doesn't do, and it makes it a lot harder for Leon to defend these takedowns. Because if Colby doesn't get the double leg, he'll push you against the fence, get to a body lock, trip you out, he'll switch from double legs to single legs. There were also a couple opportunities in their 3rd fight for Kamaru to shoot in on a takedown because Leon would expose his hips, but Usman just wouldn't at times. Whereas if Leon gives these opportunities to Colby, Colby's going to take them every single time. He's going to attempt so many takedowns. Even if he doesn't get every single one of them, he's going to dive straight back on his hips. And then what does Leon do every single time he gets taken down? He gives up his back to try and stand up. He did that every single time against Kamaru Usman. Now, he could get away with this against Usman because Usman pretty much has no grappling. He has only 1 submission on his record. He kind of just sits in your guard and controls you. He doesn't really look to transition, whereas Colby is also going to put a pace on Leon on the ground. He's going to constantly be looking to transition. He's going to constantly be looking for different submissions. And when Leon gives up his back to get up, Colby's going to take his back and threaten with chokes like he did against Jorge Masvidal. Now, will Colby submit Leon on his back? I don't think so, but Colby could keep him there and hold him there for the whole round. And the pace Colby's going to put on Leon is going to be hard for Leon to manage. He's going to constantly be in his face on the feet, constantly be shooting takedowns, constantly working on the ground, looking for different positions, landing ground and pound. And Leon doesn't fight at a super high pace. He has pretty low output, and we saw in that second Kamaru Usman fight, he did gas out. Now, that fight was at elevation, and then in the third fight, his cardio looked good, but Colby's going to put a pace on him like no one ever has. Kamaru Usman doesn't really put a pace on his opponents. Nate Diaz can put a pace on his opponents, but he didn't really do so too effectively in their fight. Colby's cardio is insane. He has probably the best cardio in the UFC, and it's interesting to see how Leon's cardio will fare up against Colby, who's going to constantly make him work. But on the feet, if Leon is able to defend at least some of the takedowns, especially early on, he definitely could beat Colby. He is overall better on the feet because they are in the same stance. That outside leg kick is going to be a huge weapon. We saw him do it against Nate Diaz in their fight. He can look for the lead leg kicks to the head and to the body. He can use his jab, use his cross, constantly keep Colby at range. As Colby tries to enter range, counter him with that left hand. Colby is a little wild. He does leave his chin exposed. He wings on a lot of his punches, so those straight punches from Leon are there. Now, because they are both in southpaw, that does open up that lead left hook for Leon, and he has to be careful. He doesn't have the best left hook. He winds up on it at times, which does leave a hole right down the center line for Colby's left straight to counter him. So he has to be mindful of that, and if he switches into orthodox to try and set up the round kick to the head or the round kick to the body, then he also still has to watch out for Colby's round kicks of his own. And Leon also has to control the outside foot position if he does switch into orthodox, and the footwork is going to be crucial in this fight for Leon. He has to constantly move. He can't stand still in front of Colby, or Colby will take him down. He has to keep his back to the center of the octagon, away from the cage, which will make it harder for Colby to take him down, because in the center of the octagon, Leon's takedown defense isn't bad. It's when it gets against the fence that Leon's going to have a hard time defending Colby's shots. And what is the best way to negate Colby's pressure and wrestling? It's to pressure Colby back. He has to use calculated pressure against Colby. He can't get over aggressive, because then Colby could duck under Leon's shots and take him down that way. But if he stays composed, stays technical, behind his jab, behind the leg kicks, pushes Colby back, that instantly gets rid of one of Colby's biggest strengths, which is his ability to put a pace on his opponents. But in the end, who am I gonna go with? To me, it comes down to who pressures the other. If Leon pressures Colby back, Colby's gonna have a much harder time implementing his wrestling, implementing his boxing, and Leon's gonna be able to stick at range, constantly pepper Colby with the jab, with the left cross, with the leg kicks. But if Colby pressures Leon back, the takedowns I think are going to stack up, although Leon will defend some of them early on as the fight wears on. As Colby starts to gas Leon out, I think those takedowns are going to get easier, and then Leon always gives up his back when he gets taken down. So in the end, I am going to go with Colby. I'm going to go with him by a decision. I'll say a 3-2, 4-1 decision, something like that. Now, Colby does leave a ton of openings on the feet that Leon could take an advantage of, and if anyone can pick apart those openings and counter Colby, it is Leon, because of how fast and accurate he is. And if he hits Colby in the right spot, he could knock him out. But Colby does have a very good chin. Although he does get dropped at times. He got dropped multiple times against Kamaru. He got dropped in his last fight against Jorge. I do think he has the chin to take Leon's shots. I think he's not going to give Leon time to breathe. Although he does have a long layoff. He hasn't fought in over 2 years. So it is interesting to see if that will have any effect on this fight. Although Colby is no stranger to long layoffs. He is not very active at all. So I don't think that long layoff will play too much of an effect, but in the end I'm gonna go with Colby by a decision. But anyways, that is the end of the video. Those were my final predictions for UFC 296. It is one of the best cards of the year, and I'm gonna be covering it all right here on this channel, so subscribe so you don't miss any of those upcoming videos. Like the video if you did enjoy, comment your predictions for this card in the comments down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.